I won a tournament with a broken strategy that everyone has forgotten about. This combo is so underrated and even laughed upon so much to the point where I knew I had to prove that it was as powerful as I've claimed that it is. That combo is Glass Trumpet and Energy Switch in Raging Bolt EX. Now I know what you might be thinking, isn't Energy Switch already a pretty regular inclusion in Raging Bolt nowadays? Well, you're not wrong, really. The Energy Switch is a pretty commonly used tech card in a decent amount of Bolt decks. But what's even more broken, in my opinion, is the second card of the combo, Glass Trumpet. And today, I'm going to be telling you all about how I won a tournament with one of the most underrated strategies in the standard format. Let's rewind the clock all the way back to April, where I started to take a deeper interest in playing Raging Bolt EX. It was right before the 2025 standard format rotation, and I had just crafted my first draft of our long-necked Overlord and his pals. I had cobbled the list together from a whole bunch of different builds, and was scrolling through the trainer cards in Pokémon Trading Card Game Live, looking for the last few cards to bling out my deck, when I stumbled across a card that at the time had only been used in a few niche lists outside of Terrapago's focus decks. As soon as I read what it did, it was an immediate inclusion into my list. Glass Trumpet is an item card that allows you to attach an energy card to 2 of your benched colorless Pokemon as long as you have a Terra Pokemon in play. And with Raging Bolt already running Teal Mask Ogerpon EX and the Noctowl engine, I knew that this was exactly the special sauce I was looking for. You see, I always like to include a custom card or combo into every deck that I play, and Glass Trumpet fit the bill. And I actually started winning quite a lot from that extra boost in damage from Glass Trumpet. Back in April, I only considered Glass Trumpet as an option to put more energy in play for Raging Bolt EX to discard for its Bellowing Thunder attack, but little did I know that I'd be using it for so much more just a mere 4 months later. Fast forward to the Destined Rivals format, where I was actually starting to struggle to find a deck to play for the first time in nearly a year. I had half a dozen decks built already IRL and that were all ready to go, but nothing felt right for me. Charizard Dragapult felt too clunky, Grimmsnarl kept running out of steam in the endgame, and my personal pet deck at the time, Poison Archaludon EX, felt absolutely horrible into the metagame. I had no idea what to play at my local events until I remembered Old Reliable from a few months prior, Raging Bolt EX. Not only was it a relatively simple deck to pilot, but it also felt like it had huge potential against the biggest meta threats. With tech cards like Iron Leaves for Charizard and Grimmsnarl, Baby Raging Bolt for sniping benched Dracloaks and other problematic single prizers, and Slither Wing for Fezandipiti and the high amount of Joltik Box players at my locals, it felt like the perfect choice. So I dusted off the old Bolt list that I had, updated it a little bit, and started practicing for the July League Challenge. At the challenge, the deck was performing almost perfectly, with wins against Charizard, Goldengo, and even Ethan's Typhlosion, which is almost an unwinnable matchup, by the way. Glass Trumpet even won me a game by allowing me to power up a free Iron Leaves EX against the Charizard matchup. I ended that tournament with a 3-1 record, landing me at my dreaded usual top 4 spot of 3rd place, after missing a single game-winning nest ball against my best friend and locals nemesis, Henry Simmons. After flipping over my top deck after the loss, you can imagine my thrilled reaction when the next card was the nest ball. If you want to see that deck in action, I actually have a video on my channel already breaking down the list in more detail. I definitely considered giving that a watch after watching this video, and then coming back and updating the list after watching the rest of this video. And don't worry, I'll explain some of the updates and inclusions in just a second. Before we get started, I would quickly ask to see if you're subscribed. I put a ton of effort into planning and making these videos, which can get tough sometimes due to me being a college student. Subscribing helps support me and my channel, and it allows me to make more videos like the ones you're currently watching. And if you want to help support my channel even further, consider becoming a member. With 3 different tiers to choose from, you'll get access to my videos early, get exclusive behind the scenes updates, you'll get creative inputs on new videos, and more. Every member will also be featured in the credits of every single one of my videos. Thank you so much for your support so far. Now let's get back to the video. After the challenge, I felt satisfied with my finishing, but I knew I could do better. I knew this deck had the potential to win an entire tournament, but it just needed a few modifications. And I needed to make those changes quickly, because there was a win-a-box happening at the store for the first time in about a year, in exactly 1 week. After scouring over my list, I realized that I didn't need to keep Squawkabilly EX or Palpad, as I felt that I could recover quite well from a poor opening hand, and that I just needed to be more careful with my supporters. Instead, I decided to add a Counter Catcher and a Bloodmoon Ursaluna EX for the late game as comeback cards that could come out of nowhere. I also realized that I could unironically also use Bloodmoon as a regular attacker thanks to the inclusion of Energy Switch and, of course, Glass Trumpet. With my changes applied, I was ready to start grinding some test games on the PTCGL ladder until I realized how busy I was that week. You see, I'm currently a college student going for a degree in animation, and since I'm funding my own education, I have to work extremely hard to be able to afford another year at the university. So, exactly 7 days and working 5 different jobs later, I was about to go into this massive tournament completely unprepared. A few hours before the tournament, Henry offered to take me to lunch with some of our friends from the card shops in the area, where I made sure to take it easy and to relax, and of course shamelessly promote my YouTube channel. But as soon as we stepped outside, I realized that I was going to have to play perfectly through 5 rounds of Swiss in order to win the grand prize, a $300 Destined Rivals booster box. But strangely, unlike the previous week, I actually felt super confident that I could win. It was time to show everyone why Glass Trumpet was a busted addition to Raging Bolt EX. Round 1 pairings went up, and I saw that I was up against the same deck that I had lost to the week prior, Goldengo EX fused with Joltik Box. And while this might sound ridiculous, don't be fooled. This deck has the ability to function just as strongly as both decks on their own. Luckily, I won the coin flip, and realizing how valuable going second was in this matchup, I chose to let Henry's dad Dave go first. And after a pretty solid first turn by using Miraidon EX to set up 2 Joltiks, on my opponent's side, it was my turn to start applying some pressure. Unfortunately, my hand was not the greatest, and even with Fan Rotom, I had to settle for a very awkward KO on one of the Joltiks, meaning that I still had to take 5 prize cards in order to win, which is absolutely awful in this matchup. And the entire situation was made so much worse when a Bravery Charm was attached to the other Joltik, putting it out of range of a simple Fan Rotom KO. Luckily for me, Dave couldn't really do much of anything, other than using a Jolting Charge on a benched Iron Hands EX, and getting a Gimme Goal down, leaving me with a wide open opportunity to open the floodgates with a Prime Catcher and Bolt EX on my next turn, which allowed me to KO the Iron Hands on the bench. However, there was still a glaring issue, and that was Goldengo EX. On his next turn, Dave drew into an Arven, allowing him to search for his Energy Search Pro, which would immediately annihilate my Raging Bolt EX. And with how much draw power was now available for Dave, as well as a looming threat to KO anything on my board, I was suddenly in a very awful spot. However, there was one tiny window of opportunity, a newly benched Gimme Ghoul with 0 boosted HP. After knocking out my Raging Bolt EX, I quickly set up the single prize Raging Bolt, using both Professor Sada's Vitality and Energy Switch to set up a snipe for 1 prize on the Gimme Ghoul, while leaving a sacrificial single prizer in the active spot. If there was any hand disruption and gust at all on this next turn, I could potentially lose the game quite miserably. However, even though Dave had practically half his deck in his hand, he couldn't risk getting rid of all his superior energy retrievals to the bottom of his deck with an Iono, meaning that he could only settle for a Counter Catcher KO on a bench double prizer. That left the door wide open for me to close the game with a simple Boss's Orders plus Energy and Bloodmoon Ursaluna EX on his bench Fezandipiti EX, winning me the game. I was now 1-0 in the tournament, and had redeemed my awful loss to the deck that had beaten me the week before. My round 2 opponent would prove to be a lot more stressful and complicated, however. I was up against a Charizard Dragapult deck, which had the capability to one-shot anything on my board, as well as set up insane multi-prize turns on my smaller Pokemon. I once again won the coin flip, allowing me to use Fan Rotom to set up a strong board against their 2 Charmanders and a Dreepy. Using Fan Rotom to knock out a Dreepy also really put me ahead. However, my worst nightmare would come true on my opponent's next turn. Unfair Stamp and Budew Lock. This left me with an incredibly weak board state, and what made things worse is that 2 Noctowls had gotten shuffled back into my deck, leaving me with basically nothing as my opponent counter-catchered up a Hoothoot and used Igipollen, leaving me basically out of options and with a new squishy little Dragapult target in play. Luckily, my opponent couldn't seem to draw any sort of supporter cards at all, and they had to keep using Igipollen to stall for time. I'm eventually able to draw my way out of the lock, setting up a pretty comfortable board state with a KO on the Budew and 0 Dragapults in sight. However, my opponent would start to set up their endgame strategy, taking a KO on a 2-prizer with Charizard and threatening a 3-prize turn to win the game with a Dragapult evolution on the next turn. Realizing this, I quickly set up my goated combo of Baby Bolt and Energy Switch to snipe their lone Dracloak on the bench, leaving a single prizer for the Charizard to KO in case of a random Briar play, while also leaving Grass Energy spread out for Iron Leaves on the following turn thanks to Glass Trumpet. After being forced to take only a single KO on one of my Ogerpons with Charizard, my opponent can do nothing but watch as my Iron Leaves EX hits the board and wipes out their Charizard to win me the game, putting my record at 2-0. As I took a breath to clear my head after a tough starting 2 matchups, I looked at my round 3 opponent and felt my stomach drop. It was one of my worst matchups possible, Gardevoir EX. With the potential to wipe out my entire board state with Monkey Dory and Lily's Clefairy EX, I'd have to play my absolute heart out in this next game. And my starting hand was looking absolutely abysmal. I drew my cards to set up, only to realize that my hand was comprised of a singular Hoothoot and almost all energy cards, as well as a Professor Sada's and an Area Zero, completely dead cards with this kind of hand. I braced myself for a brutal defeat, but surprisingly, my opponent could do nothing but open with a single Ralts and attach Pass. Unfortunately, I could also only attach Pass, and not having the 2 energies I needed to use my favorite Hoothoot Silent Wing attack to look at my opponent's seemingly awful hand. However, on the next turn, my opponent grimaced as he played down an Iono, giving both of us a fresh start. With a second chance at the game, I silently celebrated as he placed down an Artisan to grab another Ralts, allowing me to search out a Fan Rotom to start taking some early KOs. Unfortunately, the rest of my hand was pretty dead, and after placing down a Teal Mask Ogerpon to try and draw into a Noctowl, I had to settle for a simple Fan Rotom KO after retreating the Hoothoot. This allowed my opponent to once again counter-catcher up the Hoothoot and set up a Budew Lock, for the second time this tournament, leaving me with a growing hand of just Pokemon and Pokemon search cards, which quickly became useless as soon as they started spamming Igipollen for 5 turns. They were also able to start setting up a Monkey Dory and a Lily's Clefairy with a Bravery Charm on the bench, which scared me off from benching any other Pokemon in fear of getting a 2-prizer wiped out by the Clefairy. Luckily, my opponent was unable to draw into the dark energy needed to KO my Teal Mask with Gardevoir and Monkey Dory after using another counter catcher, meaning that an opportunity was now wide open for me to swing the game back into my favor. I finally was able to break free from the Budew Lock and use an Ultra Ball to get a Noctowl, getting my damaged Hoothoot out of Monkey Dory range, while also searching out cards I needed to pull off the most insane and big brain play of the entire tournament. I used Noctowl's Jewel Seeker ability to grab myself Iono and Glass Trumpet before placing down Bloodmoon Ursaluna EX? But my opponent still needed to take 3 prize cards in order to win. Why would I risk putting up a Pokemon that would be expensive, not to mention a Pokemon that couldn't even attack on the next turn? Well, it's all because of Bloodmoon's high 260 HP and 240 damage attack, which would perfectly KO the Clefairy with a Bravery Charm without risking an auto loss to a big HP Gardevoir Monkey Dory combo on the next turn. I needed my opponent to set up a fragile single prizer. So I benched Bloodmoon Ursaluna, which definitely confused my opponent, and then I used Glass Trumpet to accelerate an extra energy onto it without wasting my energy switch, which would be needed for the next turn to win with Raging Bolt EX. I Prime Catchered up the Clefairy, slapped down the risky Iono, and knocked out the Clefairy, putting me at 3 prize cards still left to take. My opponent promoted their Gardevoir, and with them also needing to take 3 prize cards, they were unable to countercapture a smaller HP basic EX on my bench and KO it with their big Gardevoir. And since I had evolved the Hoothoot out of Monkey Dory range, I denied them any access to a 3 prize turn. And, as I had hoped, they placed down their Screamtail, attaching a Bravery Charm to it and putting 12 damage counters onto it, exactly as planned. Then, they retreated their Gardevoir, used a somewhat useless Adrenabrain, and knocked out my Latias EX on the bench, trying to lock my Ursaluna in the active spot with no way to attack again. However, that means that they didn't KO my benched Hoothoot or Fezandipiti EX, which were both crucial to allowing me to draw into the game-winning combo. I used Night Stretcher to grab back Latias, and used my second Noctowl to grab Jamming Tower and Counter Catcher. It was time to end this crazy back and forth game. I used Energy Switch and attached to my benched Raging Bolt EX before counter-catching up their benched Fezandipiti EX and slapping down the Jamming Tower, knocking out their Screamtail and allowing me to take a seemingly impossible 3 prize turn of my own. Bewildered, my opponent numbly shook my hand as I slumped back in my chair. I had just won a seemingly unwinnable game after playing some of the best Pokemon I have ever played. My head was now aching from how hard I had to think about those playlines. Since we were one of the last 2 sets to finish our round, a small group of other players had watched me pull off both the Trumpet Bloodmoon and Counter Catcher and Tower combo, truly demonstrating that not only was Glass Trumpet an insanely useful and versatile tech card, but I was truly locked in and ready to make the craziest plays to win this tournament. I was more than ready to add on to my impressive 3-0 record. Luckily for me, my round 4 matchup was against a Marnie's Grimmsnarl, which felt like a way better matchup for me thanks to my direct counters to a Grimmsnarl EX. I won the coin flip for the 3rd match of the day and chose to once again go second, denying my opponent access to Arven and TM Evolution on their first turn. They flip over their starting Pokemon and it's just a single Monkey Dory. I could win this game next turn if they didn't bench anything. Well, unfortunately, of course they had to draw and bench an Impidimp that they ripped off the top deck, meaning that the game would inevitably be drawn out further. Luckily, all they could do was attach to the Monkey Dory and pass over to me, allowing me to draw everything I needed to take an early and aggressive Prime Catcher KO on the lone Impidimp with Raging Bolt EX. Certainly, my opponent didn't have anything left to do on their next turn, right? Well, unfortunately, my opponent was now able to play Arven, allowing them to get a Snow Runt and another Impidimp down. Unfortunately, they were also able to find another Impidimp, meaning that I couldn't just keep chasing down the little guys any longer. After they used TM Evolution for a Morgrem and a Frostlass, I immediately thought back to some of my test games against Grimmsnarl from a month earlier. If I ignored the Frostlass at all, the game could quickly spiral out of control for me and lose me the game by overwhelming my board with damage counters. Realizing this, I quickly pivoted into my bread and butter strategy of the tournament, Baby Bolt and Energy Switch, allowing me to snipe the Frostlass out of play before it could cause any meaningful damage. As predicted, my opponent is finally able to set up a Grimmsnarl, counter-catching up my Latias EX and KOing it with a Shadow Bullet thanks to weakness. However, this is exactly what I wanted them to do. I easily responded once again with the Glass Trumpet Iron Leaves combo to one-shot the Grimmy. I also essentially set up a 3-way checkmate scenario with Iron Leaves, Teal Mask Ogerpon, and Raging Bolt all ready to OHKO any more Grimmsnarls, forcing my opponent to try and stall me out with an Iono and yet another Itchy Pollen lock. As soon as I found a Crispin, however, it was all over, as I advanced to 4-0 in the tournament. One game stood between me and a chance to break my dreaded top 4 curse. As I sat down for the final round of the tournament, my heart was racing. I was in the finals of a tournament for the first time in nearly an entire year. My round 5 opponent was playing Ceruledge EX, an incredibly tough matchup for Raging Bolt. In fact, Ceruledge might be one of the only decks in the game that can currently turbo massive damage faster than Raging Bolt can. I won the coin flip for the 4th time in the tournament, and opted to go second? Now, I know what you might be thinking, doesn't Ceruledge really want to go first? Yes it does. However, I quickly realized while we were setting up that Ceruledge plays a lot of smaller HP basic Pokemon EX like Squawkabilly EX and Mew EX, meaning that a 3 energy turn would allow me to one-shot any basic EX he played down, for a quick 2 prize cards, which would basically put me in the lead for the entire match. Unfortunately for me, my opponent gets a perfect turn 1, being able to burn through about half their deck with Squawkabilly EX, Carmine, and Brilliant Blender, forcing my entire game plan to revolve around me walking on eggshells around any Ceruledges that they set up. I started with a Fan Rotom for Ditto and some Owls, whiffing the stadium needed to just attack with the Fan Rotom on their active Charcadet, meaning that I had to use my Ditto for my baby Raging Bolt, but noticeably without the energy switch needed to take a KO. I decided to deal 60 damage to the active Charcadet to help soften the inevitable Ceruledge, which in retrospect made no sense outside of using Bloodmoon Ursaluna later in the game. I really should have put the damage on the bench Squawkabilly instead to allow a follow-up KO with a Baby Bolt Snipe or Active Spot KO. Unfortunately, my opponent quickly gusted up my only Raging Bolt EX and barely managed a KO, leaving me at an incredible disadvantage. Every one of my 2 prizers was now susceptible to being OHKO'd by a Ceruledge, meaning that I'd lose the prize trade if I engaged with any of my Pokemon EX. I knew I needed to change my strategy once again, but my line to victory was now incredibly delicate. After a bit of mental deliberation, I realized that I actually might be able to steal the game away. I benched my Slither Wing for the first time all tournament, then used Glass Trumpet plus Energy Switch and attached an energy to my Slither Wing, using Counter Catcher to bring up their benched Fez before using Iono to drop their hand down to 4. I knocked out their Fez, denying them any extra draw on the next turn while also leaving a single prizer in the active spot. My opponent, now understanding the delicacy of the remaining prize map, promoted a Charcadet, hoping to KO my Slither Wing with a single prizer of their own, combined with a Monkey Dory. However, they misplayed, attaching a Fire Energy to a bench Ceruledge before ripping a Research, giving them the Dark Energy that they should have attached to the Monkey Dory. Because of this mistake, they were forced to deal only 20 damage to my Slither Wing, leaving it with exactly 30 HP left. This left me with the perfect opportunity to clear out any liabilities left on my bench, retreating back into my Baby Bolt, and bumping my own Area 0, removing both my bench Noctowls and the Slither Wing hanging onto a thread. Then, after attaching an energy to my Baby Bolt, I sniped a bench Charcadet, putting me at 3 prize cards remaining. Luckily, my opponent whiffed a Boss's Orders or Counter Catcher off 2 of their Pokegears, so they were forced to once again attack with the Charcadet. On my next turn, I simply just knocked out the Charcadet, putting me at 2 prize cards left to take, with my opponent still needing to take 3. I knew that I needed to avoid one more Counter Catcher to make sure that they couldn't win the game with a sudden Briar play. And luckily, they whiffed again, meaning that they had to KO my single prize Raging Bolt, letting me win the game with a simple Raging Bolt and Professor Sada's Vitality combo, letting me win the game and ending the tournament with a perfect 5-0 record. I had done it. I had won every game in the tournament, meaning that I had finished with an undefeated record with Glass Trumpet. I had finally broken the curse. I proved that Glass Trumpet is an incredibly useful card in Raging Bolt. Seriously, I really would recommend trying it out for yourself. But, more importantly, I proved to myself that I am still capable of winning larger events. After a year-long drought of always coming just short, this win was just the thing I needed to remind myself that I am a good Pokemon TCG player, and that I can compete at levels I constantly fear that I'll never achieve. While winning a $300 booster box felt amazing, I'll probably be selling it anyways to cover the cost for a regionals trip later this season. The pride and humility of victory has reinvigorated me to continue to find new ways to win, regardless on if it's a 15-player challenge or a 3,000-player regional. I know I can become the very best, and there's no time like the present to get the Pokeball rolling, and it's all thanks to Glass Trumpet. Thank you all so much for watching this video. I know I don't normally do tournament reports, and this video was completely made on a whim, but I knew I had to make this video to share with all of you, and to leave a reminder to myself to keep on doing my best, even if the format feels absolutely bleak, and if I feel not comfortable with anything to play. So, future PKIP, I want you to know that you can do it, and that you can continue to win as long as you put your mind to it. Just as a quick update on the Vernius collaboration video, I'm about a fifth of the way through editing it. I've got about 2.5 hours of content to sort through, so this project will take a little while. Thank you all so much for your patience so far, and I promise it'll be worth the wait. You guys will love this next video. As always, thank you so much for watching. God bless, have fun, we'll see you out there, and we'll see you next time. Thank you so much for watching. See you later.